we're at a very tricky stage in the ceasefire negotiations. Both sides have claimed attacks have taken place. One took place earlier on this week, which involved missile boats going against American targets, and then the Americans reacted to that. And there's been a similar incident earlier on this morning. And again, we've had a sort of tit for tat exchange between the Americans and the Iranians. Overall, both sides are still claiming the ceasefire is holding. But of course, as these kind of incidents build up, then how good that ceasefire will be for the future is, of course, rather moot. There is always that danger. I mean, one of the challenges that particularly the Americans have got is who are they talking to when they're talking to the Iranian regime? We know as a result of the attacks that the Israelis and Americans inflicted on the Iranians earlier on, that in many respects, authority, delegated responsibility being passed down from central headquarters in Iran down to regional commanders. And what may well be happening is one of these regional commanders using his initiative to conduct these attacks against what he sees as legitimate targets, i.e., American warships or bases from there. But of course, that makes it very hard then at a more central level for the Iranians then to have a conversation with the Americans. And the danger is that these kind of small scale attacks, all of which can be contained, all of which there could be an element of tit for tat against, may ultimately result in the whole ceasefire breaking down and there being a resumption of major fighting between the two sides. We already note that, for example, what happened this morning is in exchange for the Americans attacking bases near Bandar Abbas in Iran. The Iranians responded not necessarily by directly attacking the nearest US bases to where the attacks took place. They appear to have conducted attacks into Kuwait, which wasn't part of the original problem, because that then brings in other nations into the Gulf. Of course, this is what Iran has been doing. It's been attacking those neighbouring countries, and that's actually been going on throughout the so-called ceasefire. Occasional attacks into neighbouring countries, all of which makes for a more unstable region. All of which makes it harder for the ceasefire to take place. The Iranians are using the strategic leverage they've got, and they've got two major bits of strategic leverage. One, of course, is holding and closing the Strait of Hormuz itself, the blockade they've imposed on that. 1/5 of the world's oil supplies flow through the Straits of Hormuz, and plus everything else, whether it be support for fertilizers, agricultural products, etc. So that's not going through the Straits of Hormuz. That's the first one. But the second major stranglehold they've got is over attacks on the critical infrastructure of their Gulf neighbours, because they don't want to be in a situation where they are not the dominant power at the end of the day. And of course, this worries, concerns, and brings in all those Gulf nations with their concerns as well. So this is what the Iranians are doing. The instant reaction is not directly go against the American forces. It's bringing these wider issues, Straits of Hormuz and the other Gulf allies, where indeed there are American bases. But automatically, if you fire a missile into, say, Kuwaiti territory, then the Kuwaitis are going to respond, because until it lands, you don't know where it's going to land, and it could land on your critical infrastructure, particularly the oil facilities you've got. If this ceasefire breaks down substantively in a way that what we've seen up to recently last week or so, where there's been effectively a sort of tit-for-tat operations against each other, but if it breaks down substantively, as I said, my expectation is the Iranians will then lash out. And they will lash out not just at direct US assets in the area, but they'll aim to bring in the other states and to harm the other states on the basis they are harbouring US facilities or their US allies. What might then happen, which hasn't happened before, is those nations might also get involved in offensive operations. Up until now, they've very largely defended themselves, and they've focused on defending themselves against Iranian attacks with quite a high degree of success. But they do have capabilities much less limited than the Americans or the Israelis have got. They do have offensive capabilities, and whether they might be prepared to use those offensive capabilities might be hard to tell. I mean, there's no question though. They want this resolved, and they do not want it resolved with Iran basically as the victor, able to bully the whole of the Gulf. And you can look at a map. The whole of the Gulf is on the eastern side dominated by Iran. And all those countries, from Kuwait, from Saudi, from Qatar, Bahrain, the Emirates, through to Oman, all of which are vulnerable to an aggression from Iran, and they do not want to find themselves in a position at the end of any peace negotiations that occur where they are basically bullied and have to conform to whatever Iran decides to do on a particular moment. So that has also happened as well. If you like, that particular sleeping lion has been roused. and that also needs to be resolved. I think it is at the heart of it, because I think it's not only symbolic for Iran of its own kind of own independence, but it also it limits what Iran can do for the future. Because if it did acquire nuclear weapons, and at 60% pure enrichment, which is the state that they've got themselves into, that's quite a high level of enrichment. But if it did get to that level of enrichment and move the next stage up, so 90%, and actually turn to nuclear weapons, then they would be untouchable. They would effectively become the North Korea of the Middle East, where there's no really sensible military option that can be used against them, because they are pushing up against the wall, likely to use their nuclear weapons. And that's why it's so important that the nuclear dust, as Trump has occasionally called it, is effectively put beyond use. Whether that's been destroyed in place or been removed from the country and destroyed elsewhere, I think is key to it. If the Iranians would concede on that, and it's a big if they would concede on that, but they concede on that, I think a lot of the other issues could then be resolved. But it's a tricky one, because it's the potential ace in the hole that Iran might have if acquired nuclear weapons, and for them to give up their 440 kilos of enriched uranium will be a big ask of them. But as I said, there are leverages that they could then get in terms of access to the world economy, reviving their finances, which then might help them with a lot of other issues. And within Iran, there is this constant battle between what you might call the pragmatists, who recognize they're going to live and work in the real world, and the ideological zealots, the martyr complex people who frankly don't care, because for them, the ultimate aim of life is not to have a good life here, but become a martyr, shahid as they call it, and then have an eternal life in their idea of paradise. And for them, it doesn't matter. But that's the challenge that we've got in the West in terms of dealing with them. Which Iranians are we talking to? The pragmatists or the zealots? There's no doubt about it that the Iranian regime is really unpopular inside Iran. But, and here's the big but, they've got a significant number of people, the IRGC and all the people who support the IRGC, including their militia elements, which number millions, and then the stranglehold they've got over the Iranian economy, which means they were never going to give in easily. Because for them to give in easily, basically, you're talking about issues about their own personal survival. If they gave in, it's their personal survival that's at stake. It's not just a matter of kind of state policy, or whether this particular country is there. It's what's the personal survival, i.e., how am I going to live as a human being if they give in? And I think we have perhaps underestimated in the West the extent to which they'd got themselves dug in. We understood it conceptually, but actually that level of kind of real, this is about my personal survival, which I think is where we have fallen down in terms of understanding what the Iranian regime would be like.